I'm very pleased to welcome people, I think from about 320 people have registered from across the world, as well as our panelists, who I'll introduce in a minute, who are from across the world too. So really pleased to have you join us. So first, I just want to say a few words about Population Matters, in case you're not aware of who we are. We are a charity working internationally to achieve a sustainable human population, to protect the natural world and improve people's lives. And we particularly focus on promoting practical, positive and ethical solutions. So as in the name of the webinar, empowering people to choose smaller families and to access family planning where that is not something that's available, while also inspiring people, especially in rich, high-consuming countries like the global north, like the UK, where I live, to reduce excessive consumption. And therefore, through those combined efforts, to help us all live well in harmony with our planet, its life-supporting ecosystems and other species. And to emphasize, we believe everyone should have the freedom and ability to choose a smaller family, and that we support human rights, women's empowerment, and global justice. I'm very excited about this webinar. I know that our panel of international experts will share their insights and respond to questions, some of which we have set up in advance, but we'll also take from those of you who are participating out there. But as to why advancing gender equality is key to improving people's lives and helping protect our planet. Before we go to our panelists and I introduce them through their biogs and their own short introductions, and before we get to questions, I wanted to bring in Katrina Spaven-Dunn, who is the Population Matters Empower to Plan coordinator, and that's a project which will feature in this discussion and which a couple of our panelists are involved in as partners. So Katrina, over to you.
Thanks, Robin, and thank you everybody for joining us. We're really excited about our panelists and our panel today. Empower to Plan is a crowdfunding initiative of Population Matters. We support vital on-the-ground sexual and reproductive health outreach and education. We partner with organisations such as You Before Two and Women for Conservation that you'll be hearing about today. And our mission is to enable grassroots organisations to empower women, girls and entire communities. So really excited to be hearing about what that looks like on the ground. And yeah, thank you for joining us. I'll be posting some links in the chat about Empower to Plan, so stay tuned and please do check us out. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. So I'm just going to give a quick biog to each of our panelists, and then there will be an opportunity for each of them, if they wish, just to say something a little more specific about their work and why they've chosen to be involved in this webinar in their own words. And I think some of our panelists will have a small number of PowerPoint slides as well. So that will be the sort of first part. But let me just do the biogs, and I'll do them as quickly as I can and hopefully as accurately as I can. So if I mangle your biogs, feel free afterwards to correct me. I won't be offended. So firstly, Dr. Yasmeen Qazi is a medical doctor with a vast experience in the public health field. She's a well-known reproductive health expert in Pakistan and has been an active advocate for women's health issues for more than 25 years. Twice receiving the Prime Ministerial Performance Award, plus a special award on account of extraordinary work for social development. Dr. Qazi has been listed in the top 100 women leaders in global health in Pakistan, serving on task forces of various policies and programs and working closely with donors and NGOs on reproductive health matters in country and internationally. She's been associated with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation since 2015, first as senior technical advisor and now as senior advocacy advisor on family planning. Next, I'd like to introduce Sara Inez Lara, who's a Colombian with indigenous ancestry and has almost 2 decades of conservation experience across Latin America, working closely with local communities and conservation organizations to develop and manage conservation initiatives. In 2019, Sara was recognized as one of 100 great Latin American women of the century and graduated from the University of Cauca Popayan, gosh, apologies for my pronunciation, Sara, as an engineer and has worked on major infrastructure projects. She went on to manage Fundación Pro Aves in Colombia in 2003, before joining the American Bird Conservancy in 2009, becoming Vice President of International Programs. In 2004, she founded Women for Conservation to empower women to protect endangered species and threatened habitats in rural communities across 5 regions of Colombia. Population Matters is very proud to support Women for Conservation through our Empower to Plan program, which Katrina introduced. Dr. Rebecca Foljambe is a National Health Service GP here in the UK with a special interest in family planning and women's health. She's also the founder of You Before Two, a charity encouraging and enabling young women and boys to consider their own education, safety and autonomy before entering into a serious relationship and or getting pregnant. Population Matters is also proud to support this UK-based initiative through our Empower to Plan programme. And Rebecca is a passionate believer in the impact individuals can make when provided with choice. Last but not least, Hannah Evans works with college-level students and professors to integrate population studies back into the mainstream, with a particular focus on human rights and social justice. She provides solution-oriented presentations focused on interconnections between global population growth, women's rights, access to comprehensive reproductive health care, addressing population, global injustice, and advancing environmental sustainability. Before joining Population Connection, Hannah worked as an adjunct professor of women's studies and taught classes on gender, science, and feminist theory. She has also worked as a program developer for sustainable agriculture and public health programs in Honduras and Panama. So thank you. I think we've got a fantastic set of panelists, and you can see why I had to read out their biogs. There was a great deal to say, and to say correctly. So thank you very much. I want to just ask each of you in order, and starting with you, Yasmeen, just if you wanted to say something before we get into questions about your work and your focus. So over to you, Dr. Yasmeen Qazi.
Thank you, Robin, and thanks for inviting me to this very enlightening webinar. So I'm a medical doctor, as Robin has said, and as medical doctors, sometimes we are most ignorant about the realities in life, and especially if you are coming from a slightly, privileged background. So my journey to reproductive health and women's rights activist, I would say I wear a feminist lens, began when I decided to took a mini break from my career, which was going very high. I was being trained as a general surgeon, and there are very few women general surgeon at that time when I graduated. Took a mini break because my son was born. I was breastfeeding him, so I just decided to join public health, which was like a very kind of sideline faculty at that time. And when I went to the villages and I get in touch with the women and I saw how disempowered they are, they have no ability and they have no power to decide about their reproductive health, their fertility, that changed my entire life. It became my passion, my mission to advocate and to make sure that women have access to the care that they need, and they are able to make the right decisions about their life. So this is what I am. So, I use my technical knowledge, but it's a lot of passion and commitment to the work. And if I can now request to have my slides, which will just talk about a little bit of the strategies that we follow in our organization, which is also working very closely. So this is the new family planning strategy. So I work with the Gates Foundation, especially on family planning. And if you can see the colors that have been used, because it's very women-centric, of course, that doesn't mean that we don't realize that men are equal partners, but it's about women, that they can make informed decisions about their contraceptive choices, because we know in most of the cases that's not what happens. And then, as an organization which works a lot on the research and bringing new options, expanding the basket of choices, so there is a lot of new contraceptive options that are being tried and tested and brought to the market. So the women have better choices, safer choices, and then empower them to take charge of their own health. So how can they decide for their own health and make better decisions? And it is about planning their future to fullest potential. And the ultimate aim the center of all this work is to bring us closer to a more gender equal world. We know, especially in the country where I work, the women literacy and women going to work is still very low in percentage. And we really want to work where it is gender equal. Next, please. So, this is like, a global figure, but it just kind of, reflect the kind of a challenge that we face, that more than 218 million women and girls of reproductive age around the world who want to avoid pregnancy are not using any modern contraceptive method. And we know the reasons. Like I keep saying, we know the reasons, we know the solutions. It's just the how part that everybody, falters with, how to do it. So it's about awareness, it's about accessibility, it's about challenges with available method, which brings a lot of provider biases, the quality issue, and the opposition, which could be very much the cultural norms, it could be religious as well. And just, the patriarchal culture in which women are not allowed to take decisions on their own. And we also realized that in the latest COVID-19 has a wide-ranging implication for women's health and gender equality. And we really want to work to see that how it does not disrupt at least the gains that we have had in past few years. Next. So I'm not going to read all of that, but just to reflect on our, theory of change is to expand method choice, like I said, optimize the interventions, and then, create a base that is applicable for most effective and efficient, scalable mix of supply and demand intervention, because we feel it's not only a supply side issue, it's a lot of demand side issue, how to create new demand and how to, satisfy the unmet need. And then, of course, as a big organization who believes in evidence and scale, we want to drive the impact at a scale through the levers. So, it is both national, regional, and globally. So this is what, as an organization, we believe in. And if you look at the goal, we are aligning with SDGs. We know that it is very important, both SDG 3 and 5 for our work. We want to use, the voluntary use of modern contraception should remain the baseline. It has to be a right base and it should not be coercive. At the end of the value chain, the woman who is receiving this service should be fully satisfied. So that is what our work is, and there are several streams of it, and I'll be happy to answer other questions when I'm asked at the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yasmeen. Sara, did you want to add anything to your biography and specifically about your work at this point, or are you happy to wait for questions? It's entirely up to you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to be in this amazing panel. I think from my personal interest on advocating for women empowerment and specifically help women to have access to family planning is very related to my heart. It is a personal mission, just like Dr. Yasmeen mentioned, and she got very interested in helping women when you see the situation. In my personal case, I come from a family where we actually unfortunately suffer. My mother suffered abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, very, very difficult situations. I personally also suffer a very difficult upbringing, and I was experiencing the frustration and how difficult it can be for women to be stuck in a situation where there is no a way out. I made it my mission and I made it my personal commitment to help as many women as possible for the rest of my life, that they don't have to suffer or encounter things like my mother went through or I went through. So just to add that to my bio, and my mother is the inspiration. She is the logo in the organization, and she's there with us all the time. And I'm proud to say that also my daughter now is committed, passionate, and lives and breathes to help other women wants to help other women, and especially young ladies, to have access to family planning. For us, family planning is just the sparks that it starts a whole fireworks of opportunities, and beautiful things can happen to women when we empower them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sara, for that. Rebecca, I think you have some slides you wish to show as well.
I do. I'm conscious of time, so I'll hurtle through them, but thank you. I second what you say, Sara. What a panel. Thank you. I'm very honoured to be sitting here. So I'm going to show a few slides. I've purposefully taken out one about the Empower to Plan project that Population Matters is kindly hosting the funding for that, because Kat, I believe, is going to share that link with people as I talk. So let's see. So U4 it's a charity that I founded in March 2019. And the title basically means that we're an educational charity. So we educate on sex and consent and relationships and well-being. And we ask young people to consider themselves, the you, before entering into a serious relationship or having a baby. So what we basically do is I design and we deliver workshops to small groups of boys and girls of a secondary school age. And they're quite structured workshops that last about an hour. We talk to between 5 and 15, and we aim that the students are able to illustrate their learning and apply it to real life. That's really important. Next year, we want to increase our reach. So it's a local charity, so we work with local children. But next year, we're increasing our reach. We've made some educational films. This is Dr. Naomi Sutton, who's a very reputable sexual health consultant in this area. And we've developed these short films on the basis of an information gathering project, collecting questions and concerns and comments from students about sex, relationships, having babies, female and male body parts, that type of thing. And we release those videos next year to all secondary schools. And it's going to start an ongoing video project. We're going to be doing one about population next year. That's in the offing as well. Once we've got our quality approval from PSHE, which is like accreditation organization over here. So why do we do it? Well, the need is great. It's high and worsening deprivation. I work in a particularly deprived area. Between 16 to 24% of children in this area are living in poverty. Even though teenage pregnancy rates are decreasing on year, there are unchanging, very high rates of teenage abortion. So the teenage abortion rates in this area range as high as 72% of under 18 conceptions result in abortion. And this is a perfectly clear indicator of unplanned, unwanted pregnancies in these teenagers. There's high rates of sexual abuse, and it's increasing, sadly. We know that abuse happens to boys and men at the hands of women and in transgender and gender minority groups, but the reality is that the girls are particularly vulnerable, and 90% of recorded rape offences were in girls aged 13 to 15 years, and that was in the NSPCC report of 2020. And the really saddening part of that report is that a third of abuse in this country is children against other children. And if that's not a damning indictment of the society we now live in, I don't know what is. Adolescence is a time of heightened risk, and that risk is worse for children living in a deprived area. Alison Hadley, who has an OBE for the teenage pregnancy strategy, so the astonishing woman who decreased teenage pregnancy in this country by 60% over the past 10 years. And she talks about an unwanted pregnancy is more likely to occur among disadvantaged and disenfranchised teenagers and those living in vulnerable situations. And furthermore, it's frequently intergenerational, with daughters of young mothers becoming mothers themselves. So at U4 we want to change the choice denied to choice supplied and try and challenge fixed beliefs inherited from previous generations, not just teen pregnancies, but low job aspirations, low self-belief, and an inherent fear of the health service. We know that sexual health service is back to normal in this country, but the reality is we're understaffed with straining resources. So we've not only got to educate teens to know that they're there, these resources, but to doggedly pursue them and make themselves heard and find the contraception they need, and warn them about the dreaded third parent or second school, as we call it here, where they give sex education often ill-based on the incorrect facts and delivered in an irresponsible way. We really want to include the boys and don't want them to feel left behind, because we cannot empower women without teaching women and men how to do it at the same time. We've got very low rates of young men using our sexual health services in this country. And we do teach boys that even though most sexual violence is men against women, it doesn't mean that's what most boys and men are. And we are doing a project at the moment asking to men and women, boys and girls, to tell us what they feel most boys are. And they'll say they're all right, or they're not like that, or they're supportive, or they're respectful. And we're trying to get the boys engaged, to join the conversation. If they're having sex with a female, what family planning are you using? What contraceptions are you on? Do you understand what contraception is? And how do we relate to population? Well, it's easy. We don't have a trouble with that in our workshops. The children just get it. They're still learning and developing their own values. They haven't yet developed their unconscious bias that Robin mentioned earlier. My experience is that they find chatting about population logical, sensible, straightforward. They say obs when they mean obviously, they say fairs when they say mean fair enough. We don't need to explain the science behind global footprints to youngsters. They understand the consequences of more feet. And I just can't read what our lovely 14-year-old from a quite underprivileged area wrote, which I still treasure. She wrote, "We have the power to have kids. If the population gets too overpopulated, then we will end up fighting for food, water, and shelter. If we do want kids, then make sure we are prepared." So we directly need to empower children and get them to speak out in person and not online. There's a lovely bit of nice guidance which has just come out, talking through the eyes of youngsters accessing healthcare. Trust me as an individual, take me seriously, believe me when I tell you something, and let me talk to you in private if I want to. Depriving confidentiality to teenage women is really dangerous. And Brooke has just highlighted a case, which is one of many, where a teenager went to the doctors having missed 2 periods, and she didn't dare say that she thought she was pregnant because her mother was in the room. She then represented at 24 weeks pregnant to Brooke, too late to have an abortion. And that is one of many scenarios and consequences of depriving young people of confidentiality in a healthcare setting. So we work on gratitude, and if only in family planning clinics, they could be reminded as they pick up their pill, their implant, their coil, that 270 million women do not have that privilege across the world. That is a good way in to teach them. That's 5 of our 7 trustees. That's it. That's me.
Very good. Thank you, Rebecca. And I think what that really spells out is that Population Matters works on these issues globally. And this is very much an international issue and very much an issue in the global north. And it's certainly not about just talking about the global south. And there are plenty of people in the UK and in the government who would not like to have that highlighted, that we have an extremely high rate of teenage pregnancy in parts of the UK, some of the highest in Europe. But this is reality. And this is what we have to talk about. These are inconvenient and difficult truths. But I think none of us on this panel shy away from that. Hannah, lovely to see you, and over to you if you wanted to add something before we go into the questions.
Hi, yes, let me just share my screen quickly. All right, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I too am really excited and honored to be part of this panel. I work as an analyst for an organization called Population Connection, which is a US-based nonprofit organization that advocates for increased US funding for family planning programs internationally. We also do a lot of domestic level education and outreach about the connections between global population trends and dynamics and sustainable development. So today I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the links between health and education, especially for women and girls, and climate change. So in this really brief talk, I want to highlight the vital role that increasing access to family planning services and education play in addressing climate change, and of course, upholding human rights globally. I really like this quote from the UN, as I think it speaks to how integrative and multifaceted access to family planning services is in a global context. As you all know, in very many ways, the ability to choose when, whether, and with whom to become pregnant is a really fundamental aspect of being a human being, as it influences the entire trajectory of one's life. And as we're going to get into, access to this human right is very contingent and uneven globally, often reflective of social indicators like gender, socioeconomic status, education level, race, geography, and so on. And in a broader context, family planning, plays into population health, overall fertility rates, of course, environmental conservation, and social and economic growth. And conceptually, as an organization, I think that this sort of concept is best understood through the lens of PHE, or population health and environment approaches to development. So in order to address the vast unmet need, which many of the panelists have already been talking about, for family planning globally and recognizing its connections to global inequities, I think it's important to really work to address and understand the root causes of high fertility rates. So as a human rights-based organization, we're really focused in understanding and educating about where, why, and how rapid population growth is happening across the world, but specifically within the context of reproductive autonomy. So we know that when women are able to make their own decisions about reproduction, that fertility rates in this context naturally drop. More women go to school, attain and sustain employment at higher levels and education at higher levels. Women, children, and families are healthier overall, and this is a very necessary precursor for societal advancement. And from an environmental perspective, PHE really helps provide a lot of context for understanding why people and communities are interacting with local and regional environments in particular ways. It really helps also clarify the connections between environmental sustainability and public health. So rather than looking at issues like habitat destruction or deforestation or population growth in isolation, this framework allows us to recognize that people are interacting with their environments largely as a reflection of their own sort of access to resources. So this is influenced by things like poverty, marginalization, equality, and so on. And the fact is, globally, there's a really direct correlation between high fertility rates and poverty. So places that are considered marginalized without access to vital resources like clean water or healthcare or education or economic opportunity tend also to have the highest overall fertility rates and the highest unmet need for contraceptives. And in low-income regions especially, high fertility rates can pose a lot of very costly burdens in economic, social, and environmental terms. And related to climate change, it really increases vulnerability and puts more people at risk. So the fact that the world's poorest populations are growing the fastest means that more people are going to be at risk of experiencing the effects of climate change who lack the ability or capital to readily respond and recover. And from a climate justice perspective, this is also very unfair and ironic because these are the populations that are, of course, contributing the least to climate change in terms of emissions. And worldwide, within the context of reproductive health, the very same regions that are experiencing high fertility, low economic status, and high climate vulnerability also have a really high unmet need for contraceptives and reproductive healthcare services. So an unmet need for family planning in these regions especially increases vulnerability and inhibits the ability of individuals, households, and communities to adapt to a changing climate. So in recognition of all of these, intersecting issues that magnify new and existing inequality, we're focused on, making sure that we're paying greater attention to, the potential effectiveness of meeting the unmet need for family planning services and helping to create resilience and increase adaptive capacity all across the world, but especially for regions most at risk from climate change. So in low-income regions, especially that are growing quickly amidst a rapidly changing climate, slowing population growth through voluntary measures like increasing access to health and education has the capacity to greatly reduce suffering, deaths, and state instability. And there's a lot of different research that are coming out from various angles substantiating this fact. Population growth in these regions actually really hinders development, especially economically, while simultaneously increasing things like hunger, resource use, localized environmental degradation, and habitat destruction. So as a solution, investments in sustainable development, including health and education, as well as women's empowerment, again, will help build resilience and adaptive capacities for populations all around the world. And within these solutions is a very direct need to increase access to and funding for family planning services. Access to family planning and reproductive health care yields a wide variety of social, economic, and environmental benefits to society. And from a population perspective, it very obviously, influences population dynamics through voluntary reductions in fertility, allowing people to choose when, whether, and with whom to become pregnant. From a health standpoint, it increases the health, welfare, and life expectancy of women and children. It increases individuals' rights, reduces poverty, and slows population growth. And together, these benefits really help to strengthen both environmental sustainability as well as state stability. And I'm just wrapping up here, but coupled very essentially with family planning services is also education. It's common to see the two grouped together because they clearly complement each other, but they also very much co-constitute one another. So we want to make sure that we're not emphasizing increasing access to family planning in isolation. We need to also recognize that education is very fundamental to utilizing such an advantageous resource like family planning services, because as some of the other panelists have already mentioned, there's a variety of different barriers, including cultural and patriarchal norms that are influencing the way people are kind of interacting with contraceptives and reproductive health more broadly. So education allows us to help facilitate critical and independent thought. There's a lot of research that's coming out recently that has looked at and substantiated the fact that increasing access to family planning services increases resilience and adaptive capacity. The reason for this is pretty straightforward, because women and children are healthier overall, which allows them to participate in climate adaptation efforts, and then in a more broad context to unintended pregnancies and slow population growth. And in a climate change mitigation standpoint, slowing population growth has the capacity to greatly reduce or offset carbon emissions in both the short and long term. So it's being considered one of the most prominent and effective climate solutions in terms of mitigation available to us today. And this is all through meeting the unmet need for family planning services. So essentially increasing access to the resources that people are already saying they want. And I'll just stop there just in recognition of time, but that's essentially what we work on.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hannah. And thank you all, because you've really set us up for the questions. We've got just under an hour for questions, and we've got some ones which are prepared in advance, but we'll also have questions coming in from our participants across the world. So that's great. And I will sort of ask them in order, just so that each of you has an opportunity to answer on your areas. But if there's something that comes up in any of the questions that anybody amongst our speakers wants to sort of, I really want to raise a point on that, please feel free to do so. And between Olivia and myself, we'll try and enable that. So Yasmeen, I was going to come to you first, if that's okay. I mean, one of the questions I have, and we have at Population Matters, is that women's and girls' rights, and I mean, you've seen it in those statistics you gave of 218 million women across the world unmet need access, or not as yet making the demand for their access to safe modern family planning and that bodily autonomy. It's not advanced as much as you might have expected since the famous, much quoted Cairo conference of 1994 on population and development. That's a quarter of a century ago. Why do you think this area remains underfunded and neglected? And given it seems such low-hanging fruit and not terribly expensive in terms of global budgets to resolve?
I think it's a very critical question, and it's a kind of a question we should be asking as a community to ourselves. It's a question of self-reflection that, with a very high-powered, high energy, and a kind of a groundbreaking moment that we had in the Cairo conference in 1994. I mean, there's a lot of discourse that has happened after that. I wouldn't say that, nothing has transpired out of that historic conference, because most of the things that we are talking right now, they were not part of our conversation before that. So, but you're right. It looks like in various geographies, and like, Hannah was rightly saying, you can link it back to the low income, you can link it back to the lower education of women, you can link it back to women empowerment and her autonomy, about several aspects of life. and the most important one is the reproductive health and her, her ability to manage her fertility. So those things have somehow fallen out of the creeks. There was a time when everybody was, worried about HIV/AIDS. They should be worried about it. And a lot of global resources were going to address that. Then there was, of course, maternal mortality, infant mortality, neonatal mortality. But nobody realized, I keep on saying in Pakistan, for example, that you don't realize what's the baseline for it. If you look at the women and look at the 3 delays that they have, and most of the time is the first delay, and the second highest is the second delay. And the first delay is so much reflective of women's inability to take a decision because she has no financial power. She doesn't have that decision-making power. We keep on working on the third delay, which is extremely important, the service delivery point where the women reaches for the service. But most of the things, most of the women die before reaching the facility. So, what I'm trying to say is that we started looking at the top of the pyramid without looking at the base. And the base was so important that when you are not empowering women, so yes, if you're increasing somewhat budgets and resources for family planning, but you're not at the same time increasing budget for female education, and you're not making sure that girls are staying in a school, they're not getting dropped off. And the most important thing, which we have seen in South Asia, and I'm sure in many countries in Africa, is the young age of marriage. The girls are pushed into marriage soon after the menarche because it's about, it's a kind of a fear that they have. The sexuality of a woman is always a fear. So, they would like them to get married off. So if they even are studying, they'll get dropped off. So, we started looking at the baseline from the very beginning, increasing the age of marriage, making it a law. And then, making forced marriages a kind of a punishable through the law. But the problem is that we are very good as Pakistan. We have come from a colonial culture. Sorry for that to all of the UK colleagues. Very, very good in writing documents, very good in writing policies, state of the art, and everybody will clap and we will feel very happy. The implementation is so weak. For example, we have 4 provinces in Pakistan. The second most populous province, Sindh, whose capital is Karachi, where I'm sitting, they are the most progressive provincial government. So they passed the young age marriage law, in which they make mandatory 18 years for the girls and boys to get married, and also, punishing the forced marriages, which is very common. But it has happened like almost 8 years back. But the latest studies showing the maximum number of underage marriages are happening in Sindh. So it's good to have a law, but what happens in implementation remains weak. And you're asking why? I think the political commitment, if you don't have a political commitment of ensuring that women have equal rights, there is a gender equality, women gets reproductive rights, women get, like, they're saying about climate justice and everything that relates to the woman, because we have seen in COVID-19, who has suffered most? In all the disaster responses, the first thing they will ignore is the reproductive health and family planning services. So they were declared non-essential. So in the lockdown, so everything was locked. What they don't realize that the women are not able to use contraceptive. They're getting pregnant. They would go for unsafe abortion because it's a lockdown. And so they don't put that, what kind of a burden, health burden that system would have. Of course, we are, denying a woman for the right. So you're right. It has been underfunded because they have not thought of the larger issues that should be there. Also, I feel that family planning remains a stigma. I haven't seen any politics, even at the global level. You look at this, I have been a part of the UN delegation from my country several times. No one talks about family planning. They will talk about climate. They'll talk about anything, but anything that relates to women's sexuality, no one wants to talk about it. I don't think so even UK and US president would stand up and talk about it. So I think that kind of, you don't want to talk about it. You just put it there. So yeah, so these are few. I can keep on whining and rhyming, so you have to stop me.
No, I'm with you, and yeah, I'm just thinking. I was going to come to Sara next, and because one of the phrases you used in that answer was, and in your presentation, was about creating demand. It's not just about unmet need. It's about creating demand for those women that they are able to access it and want to. And I wondered, Sara, because I think your work with Women for Conservation, you're providing contraceptive access to women in rural Colombia, and you're right at the front line there. And how do you create that? It's not just about money, is it? I heard that Jeff Bezos's, the Amazon founder's personal fortune would pretty much pay for all the family planning need in the world if it was allocated. But it's not just throwing money about it, it's somehow creating demand and enabling people to ask. I mean, could you share with us your first-hand experience of how providing contraception, talking with your groups in Colombia, changes people's lives and their perspectives, and what they ask themselves, and then a bit more about how that benefits their environment as well, if you would.
Sure. In Women for Conservation, we have an interconnected approach. We working for several years in conservation, I really noticed that there was a lack of opportunities for women to get involved in conservation and environmental issues. And what we've done now is to break it into three, how we work. The first one is nature conservation. And the second one, very important component, is family planning. And the third one is sustainable livelihoods. So all these three components we incorporated in all the work that we do. If family planning has become essential because these women who are at the front line of the conservation and in remote areas where we do primarily our work, in buffer areas of protected reserves, who are the unique habitats for many species, endemic species, and unfortunately endangered species. These sites where we focus and work are AC sites, which is Alliance for Zero Extinction sites. And if we don't protect this habitat, most likely we are going to be adding to the extinction species. So what we've done is coming to these communities and build a trust and provide an environment for the women to come and start learning about environment, about species, the ecology, the biology, and so forth. But with the first step, that is introducing them to family planning and connecting the dots between human population and the pressure on the environment. So what we've seen is these women are absolutely desperate to have access to family planning. There is an inequality, there is lack of support from the government that don't have accessibility to family planning, to health clinics, to education, or to the ways to train and advance in their careers as a woman from wherever they are. So what we see is when we come and bring knowledge and the access to family planning, automatically they get empowered, and with this knowledge, they get very enthusiastic and they want to explore the ways of how they can participate in the protection of these key habitats and how they can contribute. So most of the times where we see when women have access, and this is very important, and how the partnership with Empower to Plan has leveraged so much to us in the field and has enabled us to advance in our relationships, not only at the local level, but at regional level, and is scaling up now to a national level, is that these women now have access to family planning because they didn't have the opportunity before. We need to understand the reality on the ground and what happened in remote areas, and also what happened at closed doors where there is very difficult circumstances. So when we come and we, in one workshop, the women actually have all the medical checkups. They don't have to struggle with the money for transportation to get to the points, but we make it very simple and easy for them to have family planning. Immediately, the shift on how women are started to get empowered. And we talk about in these workshops about options for training, giving opportunities to have access to ecotourism, how they can become bird guides, how they can become involved in nature, or even in research and learning the basics of conservation. And also at the same time, improving the quality of life, because as the panelists shared, is a common theme that women have a very low quality of life. There are the burdens in their bodies, they're facing poverty, they don't have opportunities, and women are underrepresented in climate decisions making. So we are addressing all this, and we've seen over and over how more and more women are coming to our workshops and I want to be involved, and they are the communicators of these initiatives to more women. So we are very, very encouraged, and we want to continue to support women at the front line, because we're seeing that they actually taking action.
And I think that's really powerful, and it's that, you know, that combines that, if I've understood it correctly, that's the empowerment of those individual women themselves, and then they are empowered over their local regional environment. You know, they have ownership and autonomy of their area. And it's, I mean, that's interesting, because one of the criticisms we hear, and it's actually one of the questions that come in as well, is that some commentators, and particularly NGOs working in the sphere of women's rights and sexual rights and reproductive health, can sometimes talk about the idea of promoting family planning for benefiting nature conservation or the environment as being a sort of top-down, almost like neo-colonialist, and something that restricts rather than enable rights and bodily autonomy. I wonder how you respond to such criticism. I mean, I think I can get it because of all the work you do, but I'd just love to hear your view on that.
On that point, I think it'll be important for them to see the position from the women. When our advantage is that we are there with the women in the home, where they live, and reality is very different from what if you are sitting on a desk or living in a city is completely different. I think why not to help a woman who is in a desperate need, who really wants to have access to family planning, who has several children, they don't have the necessary income to provide for them, and they know that having more kids is just going to add to a burden. That in my opinion, that is not that what they mentioning, is the opposite. We are talking about human lives. We are talking about individuals who really need help, and our work goes and reach out to the people who are seeking this help, this support. We are not trying to convince anyone. We're not trying to impose anything. At the contrary, we are coming to help the people who want this. And they will be surprised to see that more and more women want to have access to family planning. They want to take control of their lives, and they want to be empowered. And that's what everything starts. So I disagree with that observation, and I strongly encourage them to perhaps to come more to the field and get involved in grassroots projects, and that's where everything happens. And listen to their stories. Listen to, for example, yesterday we have one workshop, family planning, where 62 women came, and listen to a lady from immigration she's an immigrant, and she delivered the baby in the field with no help, and she came to us asking for help. How can you say no to them when she is suffering, it's a struggle, they don't have food? No, at the contrary, comments like that just give us more and more energy to help people, because we're talking about lives. We're not talking about numbers. I
think that's a powerful point. I mean, I'm really conscious of, through Empower to Plan, we seek to hear and listen to the people we partner with and work with, and the communities our partners are working with. And my experience is that whilst people may have very, very different circumstances than those of us fortunate to live in a developed country with access to formal education, it doesn't mean they're not hugely articulate and able to express what their situation and reality is and what they want. And I think we have to be extremely careful of any form of paternalism in our work. Rebecca, I want to come to you next, because I think you made the point very clearly in your opening presentation as to the inconvenient truth of the UK having an extreme, plenty of deprived areas, or a good number of deprived areas, where we still have all the issues that other countries face, where people tend to think those issues are, and we have an extremely high teenage pregnancy rate. But I wondered if you could just expand a bit on why you think comprehensive sex education is so important for the environment, and especially in a high consuming developed country like the UK. And I suspect Hannah may want to add to this as well, but why this is so important for those of us in the global north and not just pointing at the global south.
Well, I'm not an environmentalist or an economist, so I'm probably not going to give the best answer to this. But the comprehensive sex education, it's autonomous, isn't it? It's like it's teaching them. It's lovely what Sara was saying. They're very sincere and erudite and educated in their own stories, and all their situations are valid. And so you need to make it comprehensive to their age and stage of development. And you build from the bottom up. So they're learning about their bodies, and then they're learning about what happens when we have periods and when we're most likely to get pregnant. Then they're learning about contraception, and you need to layer it on that way. That's how you increase your demand for those that want to have contraception. It's interesting about what Yasmeen was saying about the brilliant guidance, but you have to implement it. And Sara was saying, these women are desperate for contraception. If only it were the case here. I think sometimes we take it for granted. And I think that giving them a comprehensive sex education, learning about their bodies, why contraception works, why we would need it, the implications of only having planned wanted children, that's important. That's a tender and conscientious and lovely decision to make properly. And obviously that's going to, if it may help to slow population rates and impact global impact per person, but it's also about equality and women's rights as well, because you're not just teaching them only to get pregnant if they've got when they want to, but you're also teaching them hopefully how women should be treated, how men should treat women, so that kind of equality and justice comes into it as well. So that's what I would call the comprehensive sex education approach. But I really am such a strong believer that you can't just open a case and say you've got coils, you've got implants, you've got injections, because if they don't want them, they won't take them. And they've got to want them and to need them and understand why they want them. And then when you're talking about bodies and the environment, well, when you're having periods, have menstrual periods, don't fill the waterways with filthy Tampax and pads that you don't need. Use your menstrual cup, use your period pants. It's all in there. That's what I consider a comprehensive education from a doctor perspective. But obviously I'm not a Hannah. I can't produce all those extraordinary, compelling stats.
Thank you, Becky. We're going to come to Hannah next, but I'm just wanted to ask Yasmeen to on that issue, and I'm very conscious of it, as here we are, Population Matters, we are founded in the UK, but we operate globally. And it's, there is rightfully accusations at times of, isn't this top down, isn't this neo-colonial, who are you to say this, that and the other? And I know that in your own work with the Gates Foundation, you've probably been accused of similar things, which seems somewhat ironic, but can you just comment on that and how the framing is such that we are able to communicate the real benefits to people and planet rather than being diverted to somewhat different issues?
Yeah, so as I was saying, I think before the intro or in the intro, that In Pakistan, we have introduced life skill-based education. We dare not call it sex education. And it is about a diverse range, starting from gender and, other, in your own word, how can you describe about taking your own account of life, having that empowerment angle? And, when Rebecca was saying, and I was thinking, oh my God, you're teaching so many things which we can't. In Pakistan, the menstruation is something that we are still trying to teach them not to use the clothes, because a lot number of women would be ending up not using even, any kind of sanitary pads. And this is something that, so many reproductive tract infections and things that can lead to ill health. So it's a very different context, but I think the way we have been able to do, and this was a work that I did mostly before Gates Foundation. I was the country head for Packard Foundation, the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. Again, a US-based foundation, but they were very progressive. We worked through the local NGOs. So we are, of course, I'm known more as an expert. I don't wear that foundation hat or a cap. So we work with the local NGOs who knows the fabric, who knows the communities, who knows the language, who knows the framing. And they have been the pioneers and they have been the champions. We sit with them, we guide them maybe technically, we help them with the dissemination plan, we help them with the kind of advocacy that they would need to have, but it's always a local face and it's always the local group that would be talking about it. And we would include, like, I'm hearing from Rebecca again that, teenage pregnant. I mean, for us, the teenage pregnancy is within those girls who are getting married at the age of 14 and 15 years. So we are worried about those girls who are married. And so we are just saying, delay the first pregnancy. For us, the framing is, first of all, don't get your girls married off so early. But if they are already and they reach out to a facility for any reason, at least try to delay the first pregnancy and use the WHO, kind of a guideline that any pregnancy below the age of 18 can be high risk. So, try to educate around that. So for us, the context is very different. But definitely the cases of, sexual abuse, the cases of harassment, which I think are global, in which, in our cultural context, but I'm also hearing in UK also, the girls may not even speak about having a relationship or being pregnant. So the thing like that, they are very uncomfortable to talk to, who they can talk to, who are the counselors. So our it took us like a decade to really make the policymaker understand why life skill-based education is necessary. Of course, there are people who would mark it as a foreign agenda, as an agenda we are trying to bring in Pakistan. We are trying to, destroy our cultural values. But one big case that got a stir in the media, 8-year-old girl who got raped and killed, is just woke up everybody. And they said, oh my God, we need to start doing something about it. And suddenly everybody, oh, how can we do life skill-based? But what we have found, Rebecca, in our culture, introducing life skill-based education is not as hard as teaching the teachers how to, teach that to the children, because they have their own personal biases. They are very resistant about it because nobody has taught them ever. So I think that's another skill set that you need to develop, and how to give the tools and how to make it easier for them. So that's another challenge that we have faced. But now we have got a good pathway and a roadmap. At least is being offered in the public schools in the largest provinces, and we are trying to make some headways. We are reaching there slowly in our own way. Of course, it is not as bold as your curriculum is, but definitely a lot of awareness and sensitization.
Thank you. And that's such a crucial point about the context and cultural differences and different approaches. Hannah, in your presentation, you really pointed out the essential pathway for achieving all those good things and the Sustainable Development those 17 targets for enabling a greater proportion of people, especially the poorest, to live better, safer, self-determined lives, is through addressing population growth, but enabling family planning. Could you just expand on that a bit?
Yeah, sure. I think that ultimately, in a global context, we can talk about reducing population growth as a means to create a more sustainable future for people and the planet. but through voluntary measures, right? We can recognize that population pressures are very much reflective of, people's inability to access the resources necessary in order to control their own fertility. So this is very much about poverty, inequality, lack of access, lack of funding, and so on. Because family planning yields such a wide variety of social, economic, and environmental benefits to society, it is very directly related to pretty much every sustainable development goal put forth by the UN, as you mentioned, including that of climate adaptation, which is something that we're having to face more and more right now and into the future. So I think that, enabling people to autonomously choose the amount of children they have is a necessary precursor to societal advancements, so to speak. I think all across the world, in places that have low fertility rates, they've been able to achieve that largely through the increases in access to contraceptives and family planning, along with other social services. So whenever women have access to the full range of reproductive care, in addition to other vital resources like healthcare, education, economic opportunity, and environmental resources as well, like fresh water, and so on, then fertility rates in that context, as I was talking about before, naturally drop. So women who are educated and have access to a wide variety of resources tend statistically to have fewer, healthier children. So this is something that we should really harness in a developmental context and recognize as something that's really vital in addressing both human rights and environment.
Cool. We lost you a little bit there, but we only briefly. And just following on from that, I think again you pointed out in your presentation that it's the marginalized communities, and it's particularly women and children who are in the front line of climate change impacts, and in those countries are the least responsible for causing it and having the lowest carbon footprint presently and historically. But there's a great quote from Malala, which I put at the end of my email signature and send around to everybody, is that it's all about enabling girls and women access to education and family planning will make them more resilient, able to adapt to climate change, and to influence and to participate politically in their cultures, and talking about the issues that are confronting them. And she also says by choosing to have smaller families, it helps reduce the impacts of climate change that the population increase brings. And yet, I mean, Population Matters was one of 12,000 NGOs up at COP in Glasgow in the climate change talks, all of us trying to understand what was going on and get our points across. But we certainly got the impression from some NGOs and some people working in this field that there was a sort of active hostility to pointing out the additional benefits from enabling that access and choice to family and over family planning and meeting women's rights to the environment. It's like we can't talk about that. We can only talk about the primary aspect, which I understand that, but it seems to be missing an opportunity, and also to bringing together, as Sara does, those women's rights benefits, that absolutely fundamental right, with environmental benefits, which I would say that those communities are going to be the ones who most need it fastest. But say it more articulately than me.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that you said a lot there, but globally, within the context of climate change, it is from a population perspective, bringing up and really exacerbating already existing and new inequalities. So from a climate justice perspective, it is entirely unfair that the world's fastest growing regions are growing the fastest because of an unmet need for family planning, because lack of access to basic human rights. And because of that, fertility rates are high, which exacerbates the impacts of climate change for these populations who are not contributing to climate impacts or to climate change at all in terms of CO2 emissions. So very fundamentally, I think that increasing access to family planning services and giving people the opportunity to control their own fertility is a matter of, it's a matter of human rights. And this is very much emblematic of a humanitarian crisis all across the world. There's many different examples of population pressures exacerbating the already pervasive impacts of climate change in some really, really low income regions. The Sahel region of sub-Saharan Africa is a perfect example, excuse me, but it's happening all across the world. And I think that, whenever we're talking about the integration of population studies within the context of the environment, it is really important to understand, and to sort of identify your own positionality here. Like if we're, I'm, a representative of a really high consuming country. So the ways in which I talk about population and environment studies needs to be very mindful, needs to recognize the very terrible and oppressive histories related to population control measures that have been implemented from environmental perspectives, right, all across the world, historically and contemporarily speaking. But climate change is something that is affecting every population. Everybody around the world is collectively experiencing the effects of this. So as we're working as a global community to kind of abate these threats that are compounding over time, we really need to kind of understand the role that population does play in increasing environmental deficits, in offsetting human rights, and increasing greenhouse gas emissions. And the fact is that, if we're not going to change the way that we're producing food and energy, and if we're not going to change the way our global economy works, then more people on the planet will mean increases in greenhouse gas emissions. And, there's the wide variety, or the wide majority of the global population right now is rapidly industrializing. And as they should, this is all really good. But, this is within the context of climate change, these really imminent threats are becoming more and more pervasive. So I think that we need to find a way to talk about this in a way that is, equitable and fair. And I think one way to do that is by highlighting the voices from places that are the most impacted and the least represented. I really liked hearing Sara's talk about, really highlighting the voices of grassroots organizations and people who are on the ground actually experiencing the effects of climate impacts. I think that that's really important.
Thank you very much.
Something
yeah,
no,
I wanted to bring you in, Sara, and Yasmeen. But Sara, carry on what you were saying.
I would like to say that we have listened to the women in the field. We have one-to-one conversations, and we're very privileged to develop very intimate relationship with these women, because when you open up to talk such an important issue, we become friends, and we are part of a network of women who support each other. My message would be that we need to listen to them even more than we listen to anyone else, because at the end of the day, they are asking us to help them. And we have more and more women saying us, please keep doing it. Please come back, keep doing it again. You help my daughter. My daughter now, who is 14 years old now, she's gonna go to school. We don't have to worry about having a baby. She's gonna go to education. Or you have another woman telling you more and more stories, hundreds of stories. So I encourage you all and to listen to these voices louder than we listen to the other clutter sometimes, the obstacles, the challenges, but listen to them, focus, and help them, because when we do that, immediately we are opening doors for education, for training, for economical alternatives for them, to get involved in environmental initiatives, to protect the background where endangered species are. And automatically they have more time to focus on other things than being worried about when they're gonna get pregnant, how we're gonna, all that complexity. So if we don't help ourselves to begin with as a woman, as an individual, it's very hard that we're gonna help the environment and help nature or help other things, because it's literally impossible. That is just one thing that I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask my colleagues, Olivia and Katrina, who are listening in and coordinating this webinar. you will have a better sense of the questions that are coming in from far and wide. And if there are particular ones you think would be good to raise, I'd love you to do that. I just have one more quick question, which is to Sara and Yasmeen. I think you both work in these issues are full of stereotypes and glib, easy characterizations. But my sense is you both work in countries which have fairly sort of strong patriarchal societies still, or and without being pejorative about that, it's really how do we, I think it may have been you, Yasmeen, said that you don't hear presidents ever talking about menstrual cycles or period, they just can't go there. How do we get men to do better in this area, either that they're not too frightened of even entering the space, or to change their patriarchal attitudes? Help me there.
Okay.
Maybe Yasmeen first and then Sara.
Yeah, so few things that we have been doing and they have been found a bit effective is to really do some segmentation. Who are the people that we would like to reach out to, even in the men, in the men domain? Of course, if we pick up men as champions, so they have to be at every level. If we are picking up the highest level, then who in the government are going to be our champions, who are going to be using the same framing that we use. For each segmentation and for each segment, we have to use different narrative. For a politician, you have to talk about the economic development. You have to talk about population from the perspective of, if the population rate grows like this, then you have to have this number of houses, this number of schools. Will you be able to afford it? The country is not a rich country. But recently, of course, our Prime Minister Imran Khan is very, very passionate about climate change. And he's very passionate about the work on maternal health and nutrition. And I keep saying that because Pakistan, the malnutrition and the stunted children are as high as 54%, which is so sorry because we are an agricultural country, but that just shows the dichotomy, the inequities, and social injustice. So we keep telling Prime Minister team that if you don't work on a baseline, because most of these women who suffer from this malnutrition and give birth to these stunted children, they have lack of birth spacing and they haven't practiced family planning. So nobody looks at the root causes. And same applies for our population perspective to the climate change. So, we are using different narratives for those who may be caring for the same issues, but they don't have the ability to connect. Either they don't have the ability or they don't want to do it because of the risk they may have as a politician. So we are using different champions at different levels. We're using a lot of celebrity, the young male men singers or a celebrity who, everybody is crazy about. They have become our champion. They're using very nice songs about population, overcrowding, denial of rights of the woman when in the unmet need sphere. And then, even the religious leader, because, in Pakistan, religion does play a very strong role. Although the cause of religion to not use family planning has been shown to come at number 5 or 6 in the all DHS service, but it's a strong determinant. So, how do you use religious leader to talk from the Islamic point of view, which has actually promoted birth spacing because it has talked about breastfeeding for 2 years. It has talked about, other things. So, use that narrative. And then we have, men who are husbands and men who should take care of their wives and should know that why it is important to use birth spacing and not able to listen to her. So, Sara, I totally agree. We work very much at the communities. We have community-based accountability system that we have supported. How do we hear the voices from the field? We had the whole project that you listen to the women that you are going to be, you don't have to tell everything, you have to listen to them and design solutions with them. So it's very much work that stems from the communities. So just shortly, because we don't have much time, Robin, but we have used this, we're trying to get involved. Then corporate leaders, corporate sector leaders, who are very much lives in their own bubbles, and they talk about other things, economy, finance, and everything, but they'll never think about reproductive health or family planning, for example. So we are picking up champions and we're trying to place it everywhere. We are seeing that if it would have a multiplier effect, and we are seeing some changes happening. So hopefully we are on the right track.
Thank you. Sara.
I will say that we're fighting a big stigma and a big taboo. There is something that for generations and no one wanted to talk about, and it was a big elephant in the room. I think it's time that we start addressing it and directly and speaking up and speak really loud. I think we can involve young people, young women, and the way that I see that men can help us. And I'm very, very proud to say that compared to 2 decades ago when we started doing family planning, when it was very dangerous, and we have to do it with a very low profile, clandestine, because people actually after the workshop, they were beaten up and it was a horrible story. So we learn as we go how we have to do it more carefully. And that experience very valuable. And now where we are is a complete different scenario. We have full collaboration. We have an open space to talk. Men are welcome. The husbands and the children of the women are all participating. So I think it's been changing over time. We're not quite there yet, but we have made huge progress. And that's what is important. And the more we talk about it, I think the easier it's going to get. And it has to become a very important point in the agenda of climate change, the environment and the population and so forth. So this is a very important topic. And the more we speak and the more events like this and the work that Population Matter is doing is fantastic. Please keep doing it, double or triple it, because you are doing a fantastic work and we need more of that.
Sara, thank you. So, we definitely could have extended.
And we got a man here. What can we say?
we could do 2 or 3 more of these. Olivia, have you got some key questions, just which might, if people could have quite quick answers to, just so we get out to the outside world a bit more?
Yes, we got lots of really great questions, and unfortunately we won't have time to answer all of them. But I've just selected a few here. One really important one that came in from Mark was about the UK aid cuts. He says that we've been challenging this ridiculous drop in the aid budget for a long time, but the government does not appear to care. This reduction is a false economy and will in the long term cause us more issues. How on earth can we change the government's mind and reinstate this crucial budget? I don't know if you want to take that, Robin.
Well, I think maybe Hannah, this is cuts, which the 85% cuts the fund in the UK government put to the UN Family Planning Association and will result in maternal deaths. It will result in unwanted pregnancies, etc. I mean, anybody want to come in on that? Is the general principle of the global north, the rich countries, cutting aid to family planning because they somehow don't see it as important? Feel free. Whoever wants to fire in. Hannah, you look like you're ready.
Well, I'll just say one quick thing, which is that, this is something that our organization deals with really fundamentally, because family planning here in the United States, I mean, right now we're listening to a Supreme Court hearing on whether or not abortion is going to be legalized in the United States. So reproductive rights are under assault, both domestically and internationally. And with regards to aid funding, I mean, it's become such a partisan issue that it is not only cut sometimes, which has obvious negative implications for direct aid, but it's also, over time, it really creates a really inconsistent funding stream for organizations that depend very heavily on international aid. So in both ways, it is very detrimental to the advancement of human rights globally. And it's something that is sort of implemented on moral grounds, but doesn't really seem to have any efficacy in terms of statistics or numbers, right? So the point is to, restrict the amount of abortions happening, or, to restrict the amount of contraceptive use happening. But ultimately what happens is more women are dying, more women are put in life-threatening conditions because they are instead of being able to seek care in facilities that are funded and that are adequate, they're going underground and seeking care in these sort of back alley conditions that are incredibly dangerous and also unnecessary. So this is something that is entirely unacceptable and really, really devastating for everyone involved.
Absolutely.
So I just want to quickly say,
yes.
yeah, Robin, that DFID, which is now FCDO, has been the biggest funder of family planning program in Pakistan, 90 million pound DFPAC program for 5 years. And into the 5 years, now they have slashed all the budgets. And these are all NGOs, and these are the family planning, MSI and, PSI and all the lead NGOs who have big presence on the ground. And suddenly the huge budgets are cut without any warning. They have been saying Brexit, the economic situation, the COVID diversion. But my question remains, because I think I thought that in Pakistan, they're so insensitive, they would redirect funding from other to everything to COVID, and they'll forget about family planning. But it's happening from a country like UK, who has been a pioneer in FP 2020 with the Gates Foundation. That's where we started, London 2012. And that is where your Prime Minister, by the way, he really talked about family planning. So Britain had, but we don't see that now happening. And I think it has really created such a fear and such an insecurity in the entire family planning field. And Australians has stepped in, they have supported some of the work, but it's very, very less compared to what it was. And I think a big advocacy needs to be done to tell UK government to put back the money for family planning. They can't let it happen after giving a generous amount and after asking all the partners to expand everywhere and then telling them we don't have any more money. So I think it's very ironical, and it's a pity, and it just shows that it doesn't have that kind of a political recognition that it deserves.
Yeah, absolutely. We're working on it, Yasmeen, as much as we can, and there are people within government who are horrified by it too. It's so short-sighted. Olivia, have we got time for one more question? Then we might need to wrap up.
Yeah, we've got 6 minutes, so I think we have time. Penny brought up a really interesting point about the environmental benefits of preventing unwanted pregnancies, and the difference in that impact depending on where in the world you prevent those pregnancies based on environmental footprint. Because obviously preventing a pregnancy in Malawi, for example, would not have the same kind of environmental benefit as preventing an unwanted pregnancy in the USA or Australia, because the per person footprint is much larger in the global north. So she's asking, have we got the right priorities when it comes to preventing unwanted pregnancies?
Very quickly before others come in, I mean, that's certainly something that Population Matters absolutely emphasizes. We always talk about the moral responsibility and culpability, if you like, of those of us in very high consuming, high greenhouse gas, climate change causing countries like the UK. It is one of the most impactful decisions you can make, is to choose to have a smaller family in the UK. And there's been good evidence from the States and also in Scandinavia showing that the eco action of choosing one less child, it's not saying you have no children, but one less child, is 20 times at least more impactful than all the other good green things you can do. And yet, strangely, we don't really hear the environmental organizations talking about it. And I think that's something to do with the taboo that Yasmeen and well, in fact, everybody has talked about. So yes, we absolutely have to curb consumption. Population matters of people, of stuff, and of other species. And if we're not addressing consumption, then as well as looking at positive solutions where required in terms of unmet need for family planning, we're not doing our job properly. But others may wish to comment. Hannah, I suspect that may relate to you in terms of your work in the US as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point and a really important conversation to have. And undoubtedly within high consuming countries, the #1 way to offset your carbon footprint or to contribute to environmental sustainability is to choose to have one fewer or several fewer children. That's just simply a fact. And of course, resource disparities and discrepancies in consumption patterns and resource use really vary widely throughout the world. And the fact is a really small proportion of the global population consumes an overwhelming majority of the Earth's resources, undoubtedly. I think that whenever we're talking about increasing access to family planning services as a climate solution, we want to recognize that this is one of many different climate solutions, and there are many different contributors to climate change, and there are many different contributors to environmental degradation. And in no way are we saying that we need to increase access to family planning internationally because it's not a problem domestically. It's a problem everywhere. And what our organization works on is one aspect of a much larger problem. And one reason we do that is because increasing access to family planning yields so many different benefits, social, economic, and environmental to society. And it's a very fundamental building block of development and of climate resilience. So it's not necessarily a comparison. It's not either or, it's and. We need to be doing everything from a comprehensive and nuanced approach.
Thank you. And I think I need to wrap it up now, Olivia, is that I would say it? So first I would say thank you to all our panelists for taking part. Absolutely wonderful. And we could have gone on for another hour or two quite easily for each of you individually. So thank you for giving your time up and your expertise and your experience. Absolutely brilliant. Population Matters we will summarize the webinar and put it up as a recording on our website in time, and you'll find that eventually on populationmatters.org. I want to say also that we are a registered charity, and if you found this webinar interesting and you'd like to find out more about us, go to that same website link, and I imagine that Olivia's already put it up on the chat room, and you are just in time to receive our end of November, beginning of December update newsletter, and you can find that on populationmatters.org update/newsletter link, I think it is. And then specifically to Empower to Plan, which both Sara with Women for Conservation and Rebecca for You Before Two we're very proud to have as partners. That project you can find on our website as well, and we simply enable it. We don't any funding which comes into that from your generosity 100% goes to our partners, and we cover all the administration costs. So you won't be paying me, you will be supporting Sara's work and Rebecca's work and other fantastic organizations from Africa to the UK, Midlands to Latin America and to Poland in particular. I would just remind people we've got a report out called Welcome to Gilead, which is the other side of population. There's a ghastly rise in regressive pronatalism, where people, and it tends to be men, are not encouraging but almost forcing women to turn their bodies into instruments for their nationalistic political aims or for their economic drive, and trying to persuade women to have more children. And this is a very dark aspect of population which people are perhaps less conscious of. So you'll find a link to that report on our site as well. So I mean, as much as we're able to give an applause on these Zoom meetings, I just want to say thank you again to all our panelists, and thank you to all our participants from across the world joining us, and keep well, and I hope we will all keep in touch. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you all.
Thank